everyone, and welcome back to another episode of FFC&Me. I'm your host, Ash Wolford. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Steele, who's been a Fulham fan for over 50 years. Came to his first game in 1972. He's originally from London, but now lives over in Australia. We talk about originally coming to games with his dad as a kid, what it was like to start then going to games by himself as a teenager, all the way up to what he does now, which is following the club from abroad in Australia, and how he keeps in touch with the club doing that. We also get his entrance into the FFC&Me Cult Hero Hall of Fame and discuss his top threes, and we have a really great discussion around that. So I really hope you guys enjoy the interview with Paul this week. Before we go over to the interview, just want to say thank you to everyone who's been supporting the show over the last couple of months. We've had some great growth on Twitter and TikTok, and we get quite a few messages coming through to us every single week from fans of the show with questions and inquiries about coming on the show. If you're interested in coming on the show, if you're a Fulham fan, no matter where you are in the world or part of a supporters group who wants to champion yourselves, please do get in contact with us. We have some block of filmings coming over in the next couple of weeks that we need to fulfill for the next couple of months. And we're interested to get some people on. So send us an email at ffcandme@gmail.com, or hit us up on one of our social sites, and we'll get you booked in to come on the show. Also, one final thing, we are looking to do a couple of specials in the next couple of months regarding mental health and dementia. And I would love it if some people could come to us with stories about how Fulham and football has helped you with your mental health, or if you're someone like myself who's had to deal with dementia, family members with dementia, and have stories about how memories and football have helped with it. I'd love to hear from you, because we'd love to be able to discuss it during those episodes. But other than that, get you back to Paul's interview this week. Paul's a great guy. I hope you guys enjoy this interview. Hi, Paul. How you doing?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, mate. Thanks so much. Just introduce yourself. Let us know who you are.
Okay, so I'm Paul Steele, 58 or 57, but very close to 58. Been supporting Fulham now since my dad first took me to a game 51 years ago. That was against Millwall on Boxing Day 1972. My dad, he's been going since 1953, and he's 84 now, and he's still got a season ticket. So, yeah, so it's all been good.
So obviously your dad was a main reason why you got sort of started going to football.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Is it a family thing for him as well, or is it
not really? No, he didn't like football really till he was about 13, and he went to Chelsea 1 week and he hated it, and he decided to go to Fulham the next week, and yeah, he loved it, and he's been going since. My great uncle took him to a game sometime in the early 50s, but he can't remember anything about it. But yeah, so since 53, he took me, I say, in 1972, my first game.
So when you started going, was it to experience the football? How old were you for your first game, and what was it like?
I was 7. I can't really remember too much about that first game. All I remember is my dad sitting me on one of the crush barriers at the Putney end of the ground. But then we never went for about another 3 years. My dad worked a lot of weekends. So we never started going again until the 75-76 season. And we then saw about 3 or 4 games a season after that, until I sort of started going on my own when I was about 15, 16 in the early 80s. But yeah, I mean, I just, ever since I can remember, I've just loved football and loved Fulham, really.
When obviously 75 being a great year to be like the first year to go to multiple games, it's obviously it's one of the most important years in sort of Fulham's history. Would you say that was sort of one of the driving forces to sort of drill Fulham into you, having that, the FA Cup run and stuff like that?
No, not really. I mean, I think it was just my dad taking me. I was never going to ever support anyone else. So yeah, I wouldn't say the cup. I don't really. It's funny because I don't really remember anything about that cup run at all. The first thing I remember was in our kitchen at home, and we'd beaten Everton away, and we were listening to that on the radio. And then the first semi-final, I can't remember anything. And the replay, I was in 10 then, and I was in bed, and my mum came up and told me that we'd got to the cup final. And it didn't really mean too much to me. And I can remember watching the final. We didn't actually go to the final. My dad can't remember what. He wasn't really going a massive amount then, so we didn't get tickets. And I remember watching it on the telly. But no, not really. The 75 final wasn't the driving force, really.
Yeah, obviously one of the things that most people sort of love about Fulham when they sort of first come in is like the atmosphere of being at the ground. And it's one of the funny things is it's to hear that your dad went to Chelsea and didn't really like it. I hear that quite often. Quite a lot of people tell me that, especially those people that were sort of fans in like the 60s and 70s, where it was quite regular for people to do Fulham and Chelsea opposite weeks when they were playing. That one of the driving forces why a lot of people chose to be Fulham fans rather than Chelsea fans was actually just they really didn't like going to Chelsea. The way there was just a different atmosphere, a different sort of that ambience around the grounds and stuff like that. What are some of your like earliest memories of sort of how it felt to be at Craven Cottage?
Yeah, well, I think that game against Blackpool, we stood in the enclosure then. But one thing I always remember is when we eventually stood in the Hammersmith end of the ground, it was always walking through the turnstile and up those steps that led onto the Hammersmith end and just seeing the ground, especially on night games. There was just something about when you're young and you see a football ground for the first few times you go, and that's just something that stuck with me. And of course, I mean, it's the only ground I'd been to. I didn't see an away game till probably 1978, I think was my first away game. So I think it was just, it was just a great ground. It was an old ground, and it was just that walk, especially on night games, which was great.
Yeah, it's funny because it's one of those things that I remember quite vividly growing up how I used to feel about being at the ground, right, and how I used to love being at Craven Cottage. But then I remember my first ever night game as well. It was a League Cup game that we played in, and the atmosphere was just so completely different. Even though the crowd wasn't any different, there was maybe less kids than there would be on a Saturday at 3 o'clock, but it just felt so different. It felt really, really special. Even like the whole sort of event felt so much more special. Even walking through Bishop's Park towards the ground with like no light when you're like sort of in the dark walking through the park, and so it just felt so different. It's always been sort of really special. Even now I get really excited about sort of midweek night games because they're just a completely different feeling than sort of Saturday 3 o'clock kickoffs. Do you sort of feel the same?
Well, it's funny. Yeah, it's funny you should say that because we moved out of London in the late 60s. We moved down to Crawley in Sussex, and we used to drive up. And I think it was days before the M25 was even built. So we used to drive over Putney Bridge. And of course, you could see the floodlights. And when you're 10 and 11, it was just so exciting seeing those floodlights at night. So that's another thing, actually, that I've just remembered. That was always exciting to see as well. And then parking the car in Finlay Street or wherever and just walking down Finlay Street. So when you're that age, it's great. That feeling never really goes. However old you get. I used to, when I was living in England, I would walk down Putney High Street and over Putney Bridge, and you see the lights, and it was the feeling never disappears.
Well, it's weird because obviously now that the new stand's been built, the sort of the floodlights sort of peering over the river aren't there.
No,
because they're not there anymore. And I remember like the joy I used to feel because I used to live in Wandsworth as well. So we used to get off of the bus on Putney. We used to get off on the bus on Putney Bridge and then walk over the bridge and then walk through the park. And I used to remember, like, no matter how excited I was about whatever game we were playing, the feeling of as soon as you see the floodlights, it's like you knew, you're like it's like a homely feeling, isn't it? It's like the beacon to home.
Yeah,
you can
definitely.
see it, and as well as especially when you used to go to like midweek games. and the floodlights would be on, and it'd be dark, and there'd be no lights in the park at all. But so
Mm.
the only thing you would see would literally be Putney Bridge, and then the dark park, and then the
Yeah,
floodlights.
yeah,
It was always like it's like a homing beacon. It was always
it
so
is.
sort of so special
Yeah,
for us.
yeah, definitely.
Obviously, now you say that you live away now. What's it like for you, sort of trying to keep up with games now that you don't live in the UK?
Well, it's actually it's far better than when I first moved here because on Optus Sport they show every single Premier League game. So I probably actually watch more games on TV than people do in England. When I first came, it was selected games, and even when we were in the Championship, beIN Sports would, because we were doing so well, we would get quite a few of our games shown on telly as well. Or I'd just watch Fulham TV with Gentleman Jim. It was hard when I first moved here. I mean, I only missed a handful of games in about 20, 30 years. So it was really difficult when I first moved here, especially I moved here this season. We got promotion to the Premier League. But you get used to it over time, and you just tend to just watch it on the TV now. So it's not too bad. But yeah, it's easy to keep up with the internet. I mean, 20 years ago when I moved here, the internet was still relatively in its infancy and no smartphones. But now wherever you are, it's like being back at home really, apart from you can't go to games. So, but yeah, I still miss
I
I miss
understand
it
that.
a lot.
Obviously you have that game, all the games being on TV, which means you probably get a better, like there's away games that I can't go to. I'm sort of, unless I'm sort of going down dodgy routes to try and watch it, I'm sort of stuck
Yeah,
following that Sky Sports rather than actually being able to watch the game. So that's great that you can keep up with that way. And one of the
yeah,
great things, obviously, being the sort of international fan base that we are, there is sort of local sort of Fulham content for you.
yeah.
Being where you are. What's that like to also sort of experience sort of local Fulham fans sort of through like podcasts and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I know. I think you've had Jack B on your show, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah,
So Craven, yeah. So I set up me and my mate Wayne, who lives in Perth as well. We set up a sort of a group on Messenger, just a couple of us at first, and I think there's about 40 of us on there now. So yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, we've got together for a couple of games, but sort of like normally, we're doing different things on Saturday nights, whatever. But yeah, so that's good. That's pretty good as well. So that's all right. But there's far more Fulham fans in Perth and in Australia in general than I thought there would be. So it's pretty
Well,
good.
it's one of the things that we've had this week. One of the Twitter followers that we have on the show, he asked sort of loads of the Fulham podcasts to sort of if they could like share their sort of demographic, and all of
Yeah,
us sort of realized quite quickly that we didn't realize just how big of a fan base we actually had in Australia.
yeah,
Even people who listen to my show, like I have quite a high percentage of my listener base is Australian, which is sort of it's mad to me. But considering the fact that I know Jack and brother Sam
yeah.
and their dad do an amazing job. With That's So Craven is a great podcast. I
Mm,
listen to it all the time. I'm often, if the kids are playing in the playroom, where I used to sit there watching it on my phone and sort of watching
yeah.
it when they do their live sort of things. They're
Mm,
great. And Jack's a massive Fulham fan. He's very very passionate, but he's also very clued up on sort of how Fulham are as a football club. And I think
yeah.
their podcast is one of those things that it really does add to the sort of the family of sort of Fulham content
Mm.
providers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, the surprising thing was when Fulham played out here in 2009, was it 2009, I think? Me and my mate Wayne,
Yeah.
we went to Melbourne to see the game, and we were surprised at just how many Fulham fans were there. So it was good. Yeah, it felt like a home game, to be honest.
Going back to sort of talking about your sort of Fulham story and stuff like that. Obviously, you said you used to go to games with your dad, and sort of that was sort of part of the experience. Which, when you used to go to games with your dad, it's a question I always like to ask people: what made those sort of games special? Was it the football in front of you? Was it just the whole sort of spending time with your dad, and sort of community enjoying it?
Yeah, I think because obviously my dad lived in London, I lived down in Crawley, so it was pretty much the only time we got to see each other. So yeah, just going to games with my dad and the football, the whole match day experience really. But yeah, so it was an opportunity to see him. And yeah, I guess that was it really. Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any sort of particular time periods while being a fan that you're most fond of, that you often sort of sit back and remember, sort of like a time period that you think was great to be a Fulham fan?
Um, Certainly not the years 86 to 96 wasn't that great. I think, yeah, probably that early 80s period when we got promotion from the third division, and then obviously the team under Malcolm McDonald. They were great days to watch games. And then, of course, once Mohamed Al Fayed bought us, it was sort of like a great time. But and really since then, the whole last 22 years. I mean, that's what I say to my son. My son's 17 now, so he's never known us being rubbish. Really, not as much rubbish as I used to have to watch anyway. But yeah, so I think those early 80 games were great. And yeah, as I say, since Mohamed Al Fayed bought us, it's just been great the whole way.
Yeah, obviously on the flip side of that, obviously you would have seen loads of the leaner times as being a Fulham fan.
Mm,
I don't know if I'm lucky enough or unfortunate enough to sort of remember, you know, the early 90s, before Mohamed Al Fayed came in, and sort of the way that the football club was going at the time was not great. And
mm,
before that, obviously there was the times that early 80s, sort of late 70s, weren't, after the sort of FA Cup final, were all a bit farcical in terms of the way that the club were being run.
yeah,
What when obviously talking about Mohamed Al Fayed, sort of poignant time, obviously very recently passed away, and we all, every Fulham fan, sort of owes him a massive like load of gratitude, because he'd completely turned what being a Fulham fan round meant, if
mm,
you for me at least, because when I first started going to Fulham, playing in the sort of bottom fourth and third division,
yeah,
mediocrity at football was sort of just expected. So they have like the sudden expectation, that we can win leagues, get promoted and get to the promised land of the Premier League, was sort of special. Do you remember sort of that time, the buzz going around the club, sort of at that time?
yeah. It was the most surreal because, as I say, from that 86 to 96 period when we spent that whole time, what, 10, 11 years in the bottom two divisions, we nearly got relegated to the conference in 95, 96. To all of a sudden have all this money. The most surreal thing I found was signing players that we were signing. People like Paul Pescasolido, Chris Coleman, Barry Howes, even players like, I think we bought Steve Hayward, Mike Taylor, and it was for a football fan, it was literally like winning the lottery. We went from the
Yeah.
sublime to the ridiculous, and to be honest, when I decided to move out to Australia, I thought, even with all our fires promises, we'll be in the Premier League within 4 or 5 years. I think I always thought it was still a bit tongue in cheek, but we did it, and I couldn't believe it. I followed Fulham for 10 years, and then we get promotions to the Premier League, and I moved to the other side of the world. So it was all a bit ironic, really. But
It's funny
yeah,
you should mention some of the names that we signed, because I remember, being absolutely gobsmacked at some of the signings that came in under sort of Kevin Keegan. Signing Peter Beardsley, like, who
yeah,
I know was right at the end of his career, but you know, you can't be an England fan, you can't be English and be an England fan as well, and not know about Peter Beardsley and how great he
yeah,
was. And to sign players like Karl-Heinz Riedler. Karl-Heinz Riedler was a European champion. Like,
yes, yeah,
it's absolutely madness to think that he was playing at Fulham.
yeah,
And it was such a surreal sort of time period, because even like, I know I was only in my sort of, I was 10 years old. When we got promoted to the Premier League, I was 11. So,
okay,
but to experience that, and knowing that the level of player that we were signing was just beyond what
I
a
know.
League Two club should have been signing anyway. They're signing Chris Coleman, who dropped down. He dropped down 2 leagues to play for
Yeah.
Fulham. He dropped down from the Premier League to come play for Fulham.
Yeah.
And that's crazy in its own. But what a signing he was. What an absolute hero he is to
Oh,
those of us sort of growing up at that time, because those squads were just absolutely immense. And I remember at the time my auntie telling us, you have no idea how lucky you are to see the squads that you're seeing playing for Fulham.
yeah.
She was like, we used to see we've seen some great players play for Fulham in our time, but we usually get them right at the end of their career when they're after a last bit of payday and they're just here for a bit of fun.
Yeah.
They don't really take football seriously, but this is just something else. And it's true, isn't it, that
Oh, definitely.
those first 3 or 4 years under Al Fayed, the squads that we managed to put together were not
Oh,
what League Two football clubs should be signing. Can
no.
you imagine a League One football club now signing a Premier League player?
Oh,
Just not even a
yeah.
Premier League player at the end of his career, like a 30-year-old Premier League player. Look at Chris Coleman, was 29 when we signed him. He moved
Yeah.
down 2 divisions at the age of 29.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about
Yeah.
when you do it. But how great was it to watch? And
Yeah.
how much of a hero was he?
I mean, even players like, when we've got Lee Clark and Paul Bracewell, and when you go actually, when you say players at the end of their career, I remember early 90s, we signed Steve Archibald and we had Brian Talbot, who were right at the end of their careers. And yeah, they were definitely at the end of their careers then. Those squads were. And when you mentioned Kevin Keegan, I remember that when they thought I sat there and read the paper the next day thinking, Kevin Keegan is our manager. When we had players, managers like Ian Branfoot, not Ian, Don Mackay, Alan Dix, and again from the sublime to the ridiculous, really.
Well, it is absolutely crazy when you consider it, especially when you think about the team that got promoted from Division 3 up to D2. And that team that managed to get promoted that year. That was under Mickey Adams. That was a team that sort of was ragtag, wasn't it? It was just a team that sort of took a league by the scruff of its neck and through hard work managed to get promoted. And then you think to the teams that that got promoted from Division 2 up to League One, up to the champion Division 1, and then the team that won Division 1, they were on a different planet. They weren't winning the league or go get promoted because of hard work. They would get promoted because they were just the best team in the league. The John Tigana season is still to this day. Even Marco Silva's football getting promoted from the Championship up to the Premier League was amazing, but that John Tigana football is still to this day some of the most amazing football. I think we sort of shot the league at the quality of football that we played that year, especially when you consider that Blackburn team that we were up against, that we were sort of dogging the whole year long, were a team they were Premier League players. Every single player to a man was a Premier League player, and we just completely blew them away because of the way that we played. It was so special. Obviously, they're sort of the times that I remember. What was that like for someone who's, I don't want to be rude and say a bit older, but you remember. You remember the leaner times more than I do.
Yeah,
What was that? What was that like? Sort of
I remember
to experience the opposite side of sort of the rougher times.
I remember the first that season under Tigana, and we played Crewe at home. I think on the first game, I can't remember, they won 2-0, and I think Louis Sahar scored. And you just knew. And I said to a mate I was with, I said, we're going to walk the league this year. I said, just look at it. And we did. I think it was 11 straight wins at the start of that season. And I remember a game we played Watford away on the start of the year. And I think we won 3-0 there. And they were second. So we were even blowing away teams that were promotion favourites. And I think we beat them 5-0 at home on Boxing Day, or 4-0. It was just it was ridiculous, really, to go from, as I say, 4 years earlier, seeing us struggling to win at Barnet, and then to knocking 5 past Watford. I remember I went to Forest, we won 2-0. At West Brom, we won 3-0. I think it was the game when Davis scored from God knows how many yards out. We just walked it. And It was ridiculous, really.
Well, I think that season, even to this day, that was the year that I first sort of started regularly going to away games, and it was mainly because after the first 4 or 5 away games, my uncle told my auntie, like, you have to be bringing these kids to these away games because they're not going to experience us going away to grounds and beating teams away from home the way we're beating teams, because it's just unheard of, And all right, Man City might do it now in the Premier League, but you know, we were blowing teams away from home, and that just doesn't
Yeah,
happen. Even in the most sort of hardest leagues, you expect some fights. Okay, there was a couple of results that weren't great that year, but they're completely outweighed by some of the most ridiculous results that we've had as a football club.
yeah,
When you think
yeah,
when you think that Blackburn away game to sort of line up promotion, to the Huddersfield away game when we won 2-0 and clinched promotion. It's just some of the most crazy sort of moments as a football fan, and it's weird, but it's so great.
yeah, definitely.
When we sort of do this show, there's a couple of questions I always like to ask people, and one of them is it's always about sort of bumping into other Fulham fans because being a Fulham fan, we're not a massive club. We don't ever claim to be a massive club, but I still now as a 34-year-old man sort of get a bit giddy when I bump into a Fulham fan that I've never met before because I automatically know I have a reason to like that person.
Yeah,
Um, that's a good question I always like to ask people is, do you sort of remember sort of a weird place that you've bumped into another Fulham fan that
yeah.
maybe wasn't expected?
I've never really bumped into a fan anywhere strange. The only time it was really odd was going back a long time, back to 1985. We played down at Portsmouth, and the Pompey fans sing that the Pompey chimes, play up Pompey, Pompey play up, and as Fulham fans, we all sang back, F off Pompey, Pompey F off. And all of a sudden, I felt this hand on the back of my collar, and as a policeman, there's about 5 of us are being chucked out the ground. And one of them was a guy called Vince, who I didn't know at the time. Sort of the police chucked us out the ground and told us to get back on the train to London. And that was the last time I saw him. And then back in 2001, my first year living in Australia, I was watching Perth Glory in the grand final here, and in the it was called the National Soccer League then. And I'm sitting there, and I've turned around, and I thought, it can't be. And I said, "Is your name Vince?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "You're a Fulham fan, aren't you?" I said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And he goes, I said, "Don't you remember when you and me got chucked out of Portsmouth in 1985? So I'd met him on the other side of the world. This was like 30 odd years later. Actually, when me and my wife went to Thailand for our honeymoon, and we were on the coach from the airport to a hotel, and I saw this little kid on a bike, and I thought, and he was wearing a Fulham shirt, a little Thai kid. So, but yeah, I've never really, I can't remember any other bumping into Fulham fans. But the strange thing is that my mate, actually Wayne out here now, he lives probably an hour's drive from me. I met him through Facebook. So we've become really good mates. But yeah, that's probably about the only time I've ever sort of like met a Fulham fan in some strange part of the world, really. Yeah, but me and Wayne.
Cool. That is kind of cool, though. Obviously, meeting people through Facebook, it's one of the things that, we like to do as a show. We do have our own Facebook community and we do have our own sort of Twitter community and stuff like that. And one of the things, and Instagram, and one of the things that we try to do is obviously connect Fulham fans. So it's one of
Yeah.
those things that, if you're a Fulham fan or a supporters group that sort of is in an area, we always like to sort of talk about them because it helps Fulham fans find other Fulham fans because
Mhm.
one of the whole things about this show is all about the community of being a Fulham fan, right? And how special it is to be part of that community. And
Yeah.
it's great when you find that. Obviously, the story of getting kicked out of a game in the 80s and meeting that person in
Yeah.
Australia, 25 years, whatever it is later,
Yeah, it
is
was probably,
pretty.
yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Like, well,
Yeah.
what other than sort of him going, oh yeah, that's me. So what was the reaction
Well, the funny thing was, I was, I think the second, because it was this, there must have been about 45,000 people at this game. And I sort of turned around after the game and he had gone. And I tried to get in touch, find him on Facebook years later, but I don't know whether he still lives in Perth. I think I did see a picture of him in a Perth Glory program. So whether he still lives here or not, hopefully he might be watching this, but he'll, I'm sure he'll remember that day. So it was
crazy. That's crazy. It's brilliant. That's brilliant and crazy at the same time. I think that could genuinely be one of my favorite answers I've had so far to that question, because it's nuts, you know. And one of the things that, you know, we always talk about on the show is that, you know, often at Fulham you make friends with people that you don't necessarily talk to that often, you know, but you'll know them sort of face to face from going to away games. You know, you'll see them regularly at games, and then you build up a bond through that. And it's crazy to sort of think that, you know, in 25 years time you'll bump into someone and be like, I know you from somewhere, which is absolutely sort of it's mental to me. One of the other questions I always like to ask, my favorite question to sort of finish this section on, is about superstitions. Do you have any sort of match day superstitions that, you know, that you would have followed when you would have went to games, or that you follow now that you're watching them along from Australia?
Yeah. Well, now I live here. If we win a game and I'm wearing a particular shirt, then I'll wear that on the next game. When we the Great Escape in 2008, because it was nearly quite going into winter here, so I had a 1960s Fulham retro shirt, and we played Reading away, and I think it was the first time we'd won away for about 18 months, and so I wore that all the way through until that Portsmouth game. Of course, we stayed up. When I lived in England, I always had to walk through Bishop's Park on the way to games. Sometimes it didn't make a blind bit of difference, obviously, but so it always goes through Bishop's Park, whatever, down over Putney Bridge through Bishop's Park, not down Fulham Palace Road. So, but so that's always wear the same shirt if we won the previous game. So that's about it.
That's cool. That's cool. We're going to move on to the second section of the show, which is obviously your top threes. For anyone who's new to the show, top three is a completely personal choice. So they're all about, you know, what Paul thinks is his favourite goals, kits, games, and memories. There are no right and wrong answers ultimately.
Sure.
When you go through them, just we'll have a little chat about them after you've sort of gone through them and given your reasons behind them. But I am interested. One of the things I do know is that, you know, if you're anything like any other Fulham fan, and myself included, the answers that you give to some of these questions, if I ask you again next week, probably wouldn't be the same answers, because you'll remember something that you haven't remembered. But, you know, I always do like asking them. We'll move on to the first sort of set, which is your top three favourite Fulham goals. What are your sort of top three favourite Fulham goals?
Yeah, again, the one of the FFC&Me, I was watching the guy, I can't remember his name now, but I think he's been going in 7 different decades. I think it was a show you did in 2 parts. And you're right. If you asked me to choose 20, I could probably choose 25. But I think probably the goal that has always been my favourite goal is a goal that Gordon Davis scored against Chesterfield in January of 1982. And we were second in the league and they were top, and there was a crowd of 9,000 there that day. And Roger Brown had played a ball through over the top of the Chesterfield defence, and Gordon Davis had to run about 40 yards to reach the ball. And he reached the ball just before the Chesterfield goalkeeper got to it. And the Chesterfield goalkeeper came right out to the edge of his area. And Gordon Davis was almost running towards the corner flag. And he's managed to flick the ball, and it's gone in the goal. And from where me and my dad were standing on the Hammersmith end and everyone else, it looked like he'd scored from the corner flag. And Gordon Davis has said over the years that as that story's been told about that goal, he's got nearer and nearer to the corner flag every time. But it was a great goal. And there was some footage on YouTube of that, which I can't find anymore. But yeah, that was probably my favourite all-time Fulham goal. Another one was a game, probably one of my all-time favourite players, Ray Houghton. He scored in a game against Manchester City when we were 2-1 down with about 3 minutes left. I think it was just before Christmas '84. And Robert Wilson scored an equaliser with about 2 minutes left. And I can't remember the build-up to Ray Houghton's goal, but I remember me and my mate Simon had started walking from one side of the Hammersmith end, and we got to behind the goal, and Ray Houghton's picked the ball up. I don't know whether he'd picked the ball up in midfield. I can't remember. He just ran towards the goal, and he's hit it from way outside the box, and it's just screamed in. And we won 3-2 that day, so that was a great goal. And I'm going to break a rule now. My favourite goals, I've always said I have to be there to watch them live, but I'm going to break my rule now. I think the other one is probably mentioned is John Harley's goal against Aston Villa in 2003. And I watched it on YouTube tonight. And if Roberto Carlos had scored that goal, they'd be talking about it forever. I mean, it was 40, 50 yards out, and it swerved all over the place, hasn't it? So, yeah, I mean, as I say, I could probably choose. And another favourite one was Paul Pesca-Toledo at Liverpool in the Worthington Cup. Jeff Horsfield against Tottenham in the Worthington Cup. Tom Cairney at Wembley. But those first three I mentioned probably wouldn't change too much if you ask me again next week. So, yeah.
Yeah. See, the Iowa goal against Chesterfield, it's been mentioned on the show before. And, you know, I did, after it was mentioned on the show before, go away to try find it, but I couldn't. It was really, really hard to find, which is such a shame, because I have also seen interviews of Gordon talking about the goal. And like you say, he has said that, you know, every time he speaks, he gets closer and closer to the corner flag. The Ray Houghton goal, I have seen this Ray Houghton goal before. I believe it was on like a Big Match Revisited, or you know, one of those TV shows where they replay old games sort of on TV, and I have seen that goal, and it is a hit. And when you consider the balls they played with them, you know, weren't necessarily as aerodynamic as the balls that we play with now. To score a goal like that is just amazing. And that John Harley goal. Now, I didn't see that John Harley goal live either. Main reason why was because I wasn't a season ticket holder the 2 years we were at Loftus Road, because the family member that used to buy our season ticket refused to go to games at Loftus Road. But I was actually playing that day for a football team I was playing for, and I came off after our game had finished, and we went into the clubhouse, and somebody in the clubhouse was saying to me, because obviously they all knew I was a Fulham fan, because there wasn't many at our club. It's like, I've just been told by someone who was at your game that you need to watch Match of the Day later, because John Harley just scored a goal for Fulham that was so far out that even the Sky Sports commentator struggled to give a distance to how far it was. And I remember it wasn't even Match of the Day then. I think it might have been like the Premiership show when ITV sort of got coverage for it over here for a couple of years. And I couldn't believe the to even have have it in you. You know what? I'm just gonna hit it from the distance it was at. It's unbelievable to beat a goalkeeper as well. Like it was just an absolutely astonishing goal, wasn't it?
Because when you actually see it from behind, it's swerved like that goal that Roberto Carlos scored against France. It's swerved that way, and it's just dipped over the goalkeeper. Those goals at QPR are always quite small as well. They're not very deep. But yeah, that was as I say, probably. I'd have to go as far as saying with the greatest goal that a Fulham player's ever scored. I mean, the only one similar would be Kasami's goal at Palace. And I think, what was his name? Paul Konchesky scored one against West Ham away.
West Ham, yeah.
Which was very, very similar to that. But yeah, I can't think of many better goals than John Harley's, to be honest, in the time I've been watching Fulham anyway.
I'm not going to argue with them. I think they're great choices. So I was at both that West Ham game and that Palace game, and the Kasami goal for me is one of those goals that if it wasn't scored by a Fulham goal, a Fulham player would have won a Puskas award for sure. You know, it's the greatest goal scored in a year. You know, if it was scored by a Man United player, you know, it would win hands down. And the mad thing is, they didn't even win goal of the month. Like it was No, it didn't even win goal of the month. The goal of the month was won
Yeah,
by an Arsenal goal that was scored by about 2 yards out from a tap in, because they were always
typical,
sort
isn't
of
it?
left down to fan
Yeah,
votes, aren't they? But it was absolutely mad. And so
yeah.
yeah, and then the Paul Conchessi goal at West Ham. Um, I was right behind that, because
Okay.
obviously the away end the away end at Upton Park was obviously behind the goal, wasn't it? So like he hit that out of pure anger, because we were playing
Mm,
so bad that day. We were getting absolutely tonked that day. We were terrible. He just hit that
yeah.
out of anger, but it was a great goal. We'll move on to your next set of top threes, which is your
Okay.
top three favorite Fulham kits. And these are just usually about memories of kits, but give us your top three favorite Fulham kits.
Okay. Yeah, so probably the kit we've got on is probably the best kit we've ever had, in my opinion. As I say, I've always been really underwhelmed with most Fulham kits, especially ones that Adidas do for just not the Adidas team wear. So yeah, this was a really good kit. And then I've got actually a couple here, which is the other one I've got, this one, the 96-97 shirt we had, which I managed to actually get all signed by the squad over the years. So that was quite good. That was one of my favourite kits of all. And then there was I think 83-84 away, which we had made by Oscar. But that's a score draw replica, which is pretty good, to be honest. I think that was really, when I think, just trying to think, I thought that was the kit that we wore at Newcastle when we won 4-1. But I think we wore another Oscar kit that day. But yeah, so they're probably my three favourite kits of all time. As I say, yeah, normally most Fulham kits are relatively underwhelming, really, aren't they? So, but yeah, but no,
it's one of those things about, especially if you're like home kits, but some people complain that our home kits are really bland, but I don't think our home kits are bland. I think they're really clean, and sometimes whoever makes our kits does a really good job of making what should be quite a clean kit quite
yeah,
ugly. And I do agree, the shirt that you're wearing is one of my favorites as well.
yeah, yeah,
Because it's just clean.
yeah,
And it is what it is. When you look at the other kit, the Lacoste Sport, is it 96-97 home shirt?
yeah,
I loved that. I loved that kit.
yeah.
Remember the shorts that used to go with it, that used to have sort of the similar pattern on it that the
That's right. The
sleeves used
checkers
to have
and
right at
stuff.
the end
Yeah,
of it. And it's one of those kits that, again, it's quite plain, but it's very clean and it's very nice. And even with the old badge as well, I get really nostalgic whenever I see a GMB logo on a Fulham shirt. I
yeah,
always get a little bit nostalgic about it, so I'll never argue
yeah,
about that. And the Oscar kit, I like that Oscar kit too. Obviously, it's one of those ones that I've only ever really seen been worn, on TV, because
yeah,
it was before, buying replica kits was what fans did. It didn't happen as much.
yeah.
But
Well,
the shirt you're thinking about at the Newcastle game, was actually, because I had this discussion with Rob Wilson when he was on the show, that it was the red one that had the black,
that's right. Black
the
across the
bar
shoulders.
across the top. Yes, and the home kit was the exact same, wasn't it? But it was white with the
That's it.
black
Yeah,
across the shoulders. But they're both
yeah,
absolutely loved. They're lovely kits, and it's one of those
yeah,
things that, if it you cannot get original shirts of them, because they weren't really sold, were they? But unless you were at the games at that time period, those shirts are always really, really nice, because nostalgia wise, they're just amazing. I do love those Oscar kits, because they are
yeah. Well,
ones that, when you see them, they're always really
yeah.
nice.
Well, I can remember that the white one with the black across the shoulders. I think that was the first Fulham shirt that I ever had. And I mean, I remember when my dad used to take me into the old black and white shop at the ground in those late 70s. I think it's 78, 79, when we were made by Adidas, was probably the first kit you could buy. But I can't remember seeing many people wearing Fulham shirts then. I just don't think clubs realised the money they could make at that point. Our merchandise was always pretty poor, really. But yeah, so I think that those Oscar ones were the first Fulham shirts that I ever had. So whatever I did with them, I don't know. I mean, you look now on classic football shirts, the prices are ridiculous. £200-300. I had the Umbro one with William Younger on it from 84, 85. I must have just thrown them all away because I don't know. They're certainly not at my mum's house or my dad's house. So I don't know where they are. But I must have just chucked them away when I got too small for me. But I keep them all now.
It's mad. It's mad because the whole sort of market for older football shirts has just gone crazy. There's a discussion I've had on the show before about if I knew the years that that when we had the Adidas lime green away kit, how much those shirts would be worth now. I think I would have saved up all my pocket money and just bought about 100 of them because they're ridiculously valuable compared to how much they cost at the time. And I have it's just one of those things that but there's so many of our kits, especially those sort of earlier ones. If you can get originals of them, they are worth so much money because they're so rare. Because they just weren't sold, were they? Being a sort of third division, second division football club, we just didn't do the replica stuff. Like the first division teams at the time would have done. And as you say, merchandising at the club has never actually ever been our strongest suit. It still isn't today. We still struggle today as a football club to have decent merchandise.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I have a look at other clubs' websites. I was looking at Brighton's online store the other day, and they've just got so much stuff compared to what we have. I mean, we're certainly better than we were, but I mean, years ago there was nothing really, nothing at all, which is a shame. But there you go. But actually, I also quite like this season. I've just tonight actually ordered this season's third kit, which I think is really nice. That pink shirt is dreadful. That pink away shirt. Whoever rubber stamped that needs shooting.
I'm not going to say I called it, but I did mention a couple of months ago that I really think our third kit this year is going to be something that will go with that away kit. Because I called that our third kit this year will probably be black with pink offset to sort of help push the sales of the offset. I'm not saying that I knew I had any inside information. It was just one of those things that I thought would be quite nice, and it happened to come true. So I'm claiming that one. We're going to move on to your next set of top threes.
Okay.
Which I know this is the hardest. This is the hardest one for people to usually answer, which is your top three favorite Fulham games. Cool. What are your top three favorite Fulham games?
Okay. But they're probably all a bit off the cuff. Actually, certainly the first one. I mean, we've had some great games, obviously, since Mohamed Al Fayed took over. The playoff final at Wembley, the Europa League final. But I didn't particularly overly enjoy them because I think they were too nerve-wracking, I think, most of the time. But my all-time favourite game is back in the 96-7 season. We played Swansea on a Tuesday night, and we had lost 4 out of 5 games. It was under the Mickey Adams season. And we were starting to falter a bit. And Swansea had been on a run of, I think they'd won 9 out of 12, and they were only 5 points behind us. And it was a Tuesday night. It was cold, it was wet, it was windy, and it was the kind of game that, before Mickey Adams was over, Fulham would have lost. And we went 1-0 down really early on in the second half. And then Darren Freeman equalised. And then literally with the last kick of the game, I think Mickey Conroy had a shot and the goalkeeper parried it up in the air, and Paul Brooker scored the rebound. And I remember I was standing in the Stevenage Road stand and everyone went absolutely berserk. So we went 8 points clear of Swansea. And we were sort of back on track then. Another one, favourite game, would be Aston Villa away in the fourth round of the FA Cup in, was that 99? Obviously Mohamed Al Fayed, we already had players of the Mike Taylor and your Barry Howes and I think Chris Coleman, but I think to still go to Villa was what we had the old third division club, and to be 2-0 up at half time was still unbelievable. I didn't expect to win. I think Villa were top of the league that time, weren't they? Top of the Premier League. So that was something really, really special. I thought, we're not going to hold on. And we won that game relatively comfortably, really. And the third one would probably be away to Portsmouth in New Year's Day 85. And I remember I had a dreadful hangover from the night before. and it was absolutely freezing down at Fratton Park. The wind was blowing off the Solent, and we were 4-0 down at half time. And me and my mate Simon, we tried to leave, and the police would. It was the only time in 51 years I have ever tried to leave a game at half time because I felt dreadful, and I thought we ain't going to win this. And the police wouldn't let any of us out. So I remember saying to my mate, you know what, we can score early, then there's a chance. And he goes, not a chance in hell. And I can't remember. I think Gary Barnett might have scored within, or it might have been Dean Coney within the first minute of the half starting. Of course, then I think I can't remember who scored the other two, but then I remember Kevin Locke scored a penalty right in the very last minute, and we drew 4-4. So that was a great game, and I think Portsmouth didn't go up on goal difference that year or on points, and the police kept us in for about half an hour after, and we were doing the conga on the away end. So I mean, I think we finished mid-table that year, so it was, you know, we weren't a great side. That was after the sort of like after the McDonald era, so we were sort of starting to go into a bit of decline. But to be 4-0 down at half time, by the end of that game, my hangover completely disappeared. So, but yeah, it's three great games, especially that Swansea game. So it really was a great game. That whole 96-97 season for me was just brilliant.
Yeah, so I unfortunately for me, I was a bit young at the time, so I wasn't allowed to go to that midweek game. I wasn't seeing to get older. But we weren't, obviously, I was still at primary school, so we weren't allowed to go to midweek games at that point, you know. So I remember we played at home on the weekend before.
No, the weekend previously we played against Lincoln and we lost.
Yes, and I remember very vividly walking out of that game and hearing people going, "We're absolutely screwed when we play Swansea. There's no way we play like that against Swansea. We're getting anything." And then I just remember sort of getting up for school on the day after the Swansea game, because obviously I was in bed while the game was being played, and saw that we'd got a result, and just been absolutely sort of gobsmacked that we managed that everyone has sort of had the audacity to sort of challenge that what could we do, because we had been absolutely terrible against Lincoln. But you know, it was one of those things that it was so mad.
They were like a team possessed that night. I mean, you had Darren Freeman, Nicky Conroy. They were just like, I mean, because that was those 4 defeats in those 5 games. We won Sky Sports once that season, and we lost 4-1 to Cardiff on a Friday night. We were absolutely dreadful. So we lost to Lincoln. I can't remember who the other defeat was against. And I think within that 5 games, we'd won 4-1 at Scunthorpe, which was a bit odd. But yeah, that night against Swansea, it was just, they were like a team possessed. And yeah, I mean, when we went 1-0 down, you still thought we're still going to win this. I'm convinced, had we lost that night though, that we may well have not got promotion, because Mickey Adams, I think in his programme notes, said he'd given them, they were all, you know, their confidence was shot. I think he'd given them half the week off. So yeah, so quite why they turned that game around and played like they did. But it was just a great game that night. And you know, it was cold, it was wet, and it was horrible. But yeah, so brilliant.
Obviously, the second game you mentioned is one of my favourite games from my childhood. It's one of those moments that sort of solidifies in my brain why I'm a Fulham fan and why I love Fulham so much. You know, that Aston Villa Cup game, the Simon Morgan Cup game. Which if anyone does the Fulham stadium tour, the Craven Cottage Stadium tour, you will see we actually have a plaque in our trophy cabinet for that game, because it won the Giant Killer. They won the Giant Killer Award.
That's
they give out every year. And that Simon Morgan game, that game for me, it was just so magical, you know, because we didn't go to that game expecting anything from it. As you say, Villa were top of the Premier League at the time, you know, and they'd gone unbeaten. They'd gone unbeaten for, I think, like a month and a half. They hadn't dropped a point in ages. Like 6 games, they hadn't dropped a point. They were a really good Villa team, and they played a strong team as well. They didn't drop many of their first team, and to go there and to win was amazing. To go there and Simon Morgan to score was, you know, he didn't score many, but when he did, they were special.
He scored with a header, didn't he? I think.
Yeah. It was such a special. So and obviously we did it in that yellow and black away kit that
That's
I
right.
loved
Demon
as a
Internet.
kid. Absolutely loved it as a kid.
Yeah.
It was such an amazing day to be a Fulham fan.
Yeah, it was. It was a
Um,
great day.
and then and the third game you mentioned, obviously the Portsmouth game that finished 4-4. Now we have had this on the show before, and I have actively gone out to sort of try and find this game before. And I think I was lucky enough to find some footage of it on YouTube
Oh, okay.
when after it had been on the show, but I have not been able to find it since because I tried to suggest somebody else to watch it. But so I don't know if it was removed and it just hasn't been put back up or
Mm.
whatever. But I do, and I have spoke about it with people before about if you think some of the games we've seen, especially usually the argument people have about leaving football games early and about why you don't do it even when you're sort of being battered in games because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's usually the one that sort of gets said to us when we were younger. And my auntie Frida, who was like one who used to take us to games, she never left the game early. That was one of her reasons why. She was like, anyone who was at Portsmouth on New Year's Eve, on New Year's Day, will tell you exactly why you don't leave a game early
Yeah.
because you're being destroyed. She never
Yeah.
mentioned the fact the police wouldn't let you out, which is such a Fulham thing to happen. That you
Yeah.
want to leave, but the police won't let you. They're making you go back in and watch what could be absolutely heart-ending.
Yeah.
But
Well, the funny thing was that the Manchester City game when we were 2-1 down with a few minutes left, that was in the same month. I mean, that was I think the Portsmouth game. That Man City game was the Saturday before Christmas of '84, and that Portsmouth game was New Year's Day '85. So within a few weeks, there were two games where if you left early, I remember after the Man City game, we bumped into some guys at Putney Station, and we said, and he said, "Oh, it's a shame we lost." I said, "No, we actually won 3-2," and he couldn't believe it. So yeah, so that's I can't ever remember leaving a Fulham game early ever.
Well, that's the argument to exactly why you don't.
Yeah,
Anyone who's
yeah,
watching this who likes to leave early, unless you have a particularly valid reason to be leaving a game early, the
yeah.
scoreline should not be one of them because
No, that's
you never
right.
know what's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to move on to your last set of top threes, which is your favorite
Okay.
Fulham moments or memories. Um, Paul, give us your sort of top three favorite moments and memories.
I think probably, even though we lost and it was still quite nerve-wracking, probably the Europa League final. Being there with my dad and my uncle and my cousin were there. I think I remember sitting in was it the Volkspark Stadium that they called it before the game, and I was thinking, this is for all those years that we watched rubbish football, and it was surreal. I mean, I remember thinking, we're in a bloody major league, a European final here. It was the most surreal moment, and of course, I was living in Australia by then, so I'd left Perth on Monday. I got to Hamburg on Tuesday, watched the game Wednesday, and flew back Thursday. So 4 days, literally round trip. So I think that was probably a great memory, just being there with my dad for a few days, and for every Fulham fan that was there, that was had watched rubbish football for years, was probably a great thing. Secondly, the Championship playoff final, again for pretty much the same reasons. First time we've been at Wembley for 35, 40 years. I'd flown over for that game. I flew back for that game as well with my son, he would have been about 12 then. So that was the first game he had, and still the only Fulham game he's actually seen live. So my dad was there, my son, and my mate Wayne, who lives here, he flew back, and two other great mates of mine. So there were 6 or 7 of us at Wembley with their sons as well. And to see us win again, I didn't overly enjoy the game. I think we went 1-0 up after 20 minutes and then hanging on. And you think, Villa were going to, especially after who got sent off, Dennis O'Doyle, was it? Yeah. And I thought, here we go. And they were pushing forward. And I thought, so really the second half I didn't particularly enjoy. It's too nerve-wracking, really. But just being there, of course, when the final whistle went, great. It was fantastic. And I think I said, I was absolutely knackered afterwards. I think I was going to go out for a drink with my mate, and we decided we just went back to my dad's house, and we just got fish and chips, and I think I fell asleep because it was draining watching that game. And that season as well, back in October that season, I'd flown over just to spend some time with my parents, because I hadn't been home for about 5 or 6 years. And we went to the Preston game, and my dad surprised me with tickets to the George Cohen Lounge, which was really good because my dad was in the same year at school as George Cohen.
Oh, wow, okay, cool.
Yeah, so they were in the same. It was called Fulham. It was called Henry Compton.
Yeah,
and even of course they were in the city. So, and we actually sat on the same table as George and his wife. And yeah, so they were reminiscing about their school days, and George was telling me about Alan Clark, why Alan Clark left Fulham. And about, obviously, and it was again a most surreal moment sitting next to this guy who was a legend at Fulham. It was a World Cup winner, and yet here he was, just an ordinary guy. And that was really, really good. The meal was good, food was good, drink was good. The game, I think we drew 2-2. I think we were 2-0 down in that game against Preston. So the result was okay in the end. But yeah, so I think those probably those first 2 games I mentioned are special, really. It's just a shame that we didn't win the Europa League, because I think you said in previous podcast, it's not going to happen again in our lifetime, I wouldn't think. Although you never know, but it's unlikely.
No, it's one of those things that it's my biggest regret as a man that I didn't get to go to the final. My passport ran out halfway through the season, and I wasn't working at the time, and I didn't have the money to get it replaced.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that, I tried for. It got to the point where when we got to the quarterfinal, I was doing all sorts to try and raise the money to be able to pay to get my passport done. And then it got to the point where I realized that even if I had enough money to pay for the passport getting renewed, I didn't have enough time for it to get sent off and to come back. And it was just, so it was one of those things. It was really heartbreaking for me. It's one of those things that, I'm not. It'll never be thankful you lose the European final, but it's one of the only shine, like the silver lining of it for me personally, is just that I didn't miss what would have been, the biggest day in the club's history, because of a 1 6-month period while I was out of work. But it's just one of those things, wasn't it? The playoff final, as you talk about it, to me is one of the most surreal days of my life, because I've never known a football match to last as long as that football match did. I'm 100% sure that second half was about 2 hours long.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous, and the first half went so quick, because we were so elated to have scored and gone 1-0 up, that the rest of the first half it zipped by. It was gone so quick, but that second half felt like it took hours. It was so nerve-wracking. Every time Villa got anywhere near the edge of the box with the ball, the Fulham fan in you sort of, oh, this is it, and it just never happened. It just never scored. And after Adoy got sent off, it was like it was so painful. And as you say, it was one of those days for me. It's not happened very often before. It was so emotionally exhausting. It was so bad. I remember, when we won the full-time whistle went, I was crying. For multiple reasons. It's not just because, we've been promoted back to the Premier League, and I was thinking of family members that hadn't made it had passed away and hadn't made it. But, I was so just emotionally drained. It's been such a long season anyway, that it was just so. I remember the walk back to the train station and after the game, and it just been just one of the most surreal moments, because it was like we obviously just got promoted back to the Premier League. We just seen Fulham win at Wembley, which is a dream that most kids, well, football fans have. You see your team win at Wembley is a dream that most of us have. It would be great if it were an FA Cup final at some point, but playoff final would do. But it was so emotionally draining that I like you. We had a couple of drinks on the way home, but that was mainly just to sort of settle the nerves of what, like, even after the game, it was just like, it wasn't really a celebration. And I came home and I think I passed out on the sofa, and I woke up at like 4 a.m. because it was like my wife thought that it was because I'd been drinking, but it wasn't. Just because I was exhausted, absolutely just emotionally exhausted after that game.
Yeah. Well, I remember that cost me a small fortune coming home, because obviously flying back from Australia, even though I work for an airline here, I can get cheap travel. I sort of like you go on standby, so I didn't want a chance not being able to get back, especially when I went back for the Europa League final. And I thought, if we lose this Championship playoff game, I thought I've got a 12,000 kilometre trip home. If you win, it's all worth every penny. When you lose, I remember when Diego Forlan stuck that goal in the last minute of extra time, and I just sank back into my seat, and I thought, I've got a 12,000 mile trip home now. And it was just, it was strange because, I mean, I think if you had said at the beginning of that season, you're going to get to the final and lose it, we would have all accepted it. And I think that's the problem with it, but it was still, if we were a Man United or a Man City or a Chelsea, you know that probably within 5, 6, 7 years, you're more than likely going to get close to reaching another European final. But I've got a mate who's someone who's a Middlesbrough fan. When they got there and they lost, I can't remember who they lost to, and he said he knew that he was never going to see Middlesbrough in another. I think it was called the UEFA Cup when they got there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it's who knows? It might do. But imagine I just want to see us win an FA Cup final. To be honest, I'd love to see us win the FA Cup more than anything.
I'd give anything, and I was so convinced last year was going to be our year to do it as well.
Yeah.
Until that 2 minutes of madness at Old Trafford, I was convinced last year was the year. We finally managed to we'd managed to evade getting Man City in a cup draw, So I was like, right, great, we might actually get somewhere. And it was heartbreaking. And obviously, I just want to hit on the last sort of memory moment, your last memory, which obviously, sitting in the George Cohen lounge, and eating lunch with George, and watching your dad and George obviously converse about growing up and going to school with each other. How weird was that? Like how weird is it to sit there and watch your dad and one of the biggest heroes of our football club, World Cup winner, not even at Fulham, he's one of England's biggest footballing heroes. Have a conversation. Like how mad was that?
Yeah, it's funny because however old you get, as I say, I was what was that, 5 years ago? So I was 52 then. It's meeting your footballers never diminishes. That feeling never diminishes. And I'm sitting there, and he's to my right, and I kept looking at him. And he must have thought I was a bit odd because I'm thinking, this guy won the World Cup, for goodness sake. He's probably England's greatest ever right back, certainly Fulham's best ever right back. But he was just chatting as if we'd known each other for years. And he's just a human being at the end of the day. But he had some great stories to tell about Fulham and whatever, and why. I was asking, with the players that we let go, and he told me one quick story. I mean, this is his story, but I've heard another, that the reason that Alan Clark left Fulham, he went to Vic Buckingham, I think was the manager at the time, and he wanted another £1 a week, and Vic Buckingham wouldn't pay it. So he said, okay, and he put in a transfer request. I mean, I've heard that when I think we got relegated and Clark was still there, and he had to leave because, to obviously further his ambitions to play for England. He wouldn't have played for England, which is probably more likely. But yeah, it was really very surreal. So that was a real, and I think, when your heroes pass away, you hear about ex-players dying, everyone passes away, obviously. But I was really quite upset when George Cohen passed away, because he's such a lovely guy, a real genuine guy. And his sons joined us later, or one of his sons did. And of course, the guy survived cancer twice. But yeah, a really, really nice guy, and just Fulham through and through, really. Really good.
I was lucky. I met him once. It was only briefly, and it wasn't even at Fulham. It was I used to, one of my first jobs when I left school, I used to work for a catering company. A catering equipment hire company in Wandsworth, and we were covering an event at the Football Association, and he was there. He was like a guest speaker or something, whatever this event was, and I remember going out of my way to sort of the chairs I was loading up in the van. I sort of saw him waiting in the in the loading bay area for his like car to come pick him up.
Yeah.
And I did something I shouldn't have done. I went over and started speaking to him, and the security guard there was like, "Well, whoa, you can't be doing this." It's like, look, it's like not only is that a World Cup winning footballer over there, like, he's like literally one of, even though I never got to see him play, I've heard so many stories about him. He's literally one of my footballing heroes. And
Yeah.
he told the security guard, "No, he just wants to ask me a question. It's fine." And we had like a little 5 minute chat about Fulham. He was lovely, such a lovely guy, and
Yeah.
it is crazy when you think about it. I only had a 5 minute conversation with him, but when the news came, obviously that he passed away last year, well, earlier on in the year, as it was, it hit me really, really hard. It's so
Yeah.
odd, for someone that that I'd only ever met for a quick 5 minute conversation about Fulham, and he clearly loved Fulham, massive love for Fulham, to the point where he's one of those people that we often as a football club people always talk about Johnny Haynes and how massive Johnny Haynes is, but George Cohen is for me up there as
without a doubt.
maybe even Fulham's greatest ever player. I know that Johnny Haynes is always going to win that in most people's argument because of who he was and England captain and stuff like that. But it was just such a surreal. It was such a surreal moment, that it's one of those things. It lived with me forever. It's one of those. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're gonna move on to the last part of the show, which is the FFC&Me Cult Hero Hall of Fame. For
Okay.
anyone who's sort of new to the show, a cult hero is not necessarily the greatest footballer who's ever played for football. They don't have to be a Fulham player, but we have had managers going in the past. The greatest sort of hero that is not necessarily the greatest we've ever had, but you loved them being at Fulham. In this season, we've had a few entrants in. We've had Sean Davis has been put in, John Panstill's been put in, Les Strong's been put in, and Bobby Keach has been put in.
Oh, blimey.
Paul, who do you want to put into the FFC&Me Cult Hero Hall of Fame?
Yeah, this was the hardest one actually. I had a good hard think, and there was four that I had. It was Ray Houghton, Steve Finnan, George Cohen, but the one I settled on was Jeff Horsfield. He was just it was a sort of that. He was the player. Never forgot where he came from. I mean, he was a bricklayer, I think, wasn't he? Before he was a footballer. And he was a very good footballer as well. I mean, we signed him from Halifax, and even though he only came up sort of one division, I think Halifax were in Division 4. Or were they non-league? I don't know whether they were non-league at that point, but he came up probably one or two divisions. But he slotted into that Fulham side like he'd been playing for years. And as I say, he was a very good footballer. That goal he scored against Tottenham in the Worthington Cup was a great goal, and I think that put the 3-1 up. And he was a sort of player that when you watched him, you were watching one of your mates play on the park. And yeah, it was just for a big guy, and he was very aggressive. And it was a shame. Obviously, when who was the manager then? I can't remember who the manager was before Tigana now. Paul Bracewell, wasn't it? And Keegan signed him, didn't he? And then Paul Bracewell took over. And obviously, when John Tigana took over, he didn't fancy him, so sold him on. He wasn't part of that. I mean, they signed, obviously, Sahar was his replacement, I think. So he was a good replacement. But yeah, he was just a really down-to-earth footballer that never forgot where he came from. And I think that's what probably, made him the sort of player he was. And yeah, scored some. I think he was our top scorer in the next season. I think he only scored 15 goals, but he's still our top scorer. But yeah, he slotted into that Fulham side like he'd been playing forever. And I think when he went to Birmingham and he went to West Brom, I think he was a big favourite there as well. Just a great footballer, a really nice guy.
I think that he's part of my two favourite Fulham, like the striking partnership. Jeff Horsfield and Paul Pescalino. For us, the little and large of strike partnerships. When we used to play football on the playground, me and my cousin used to pretend to be Jeff Horsfield and Paul Pescalino, where everybody else around us is being sort of, Henri and Bergkamp. So it's one of those things. He's an absolute hero, and he's one of those people that even after he sort of stopped playing for Fulham, I used to love to see him do so well. That year, the year at West Brom, the great escape year that West Brom had, that he obviously was such a major part of. I was so happy, not necessarily for West Brom staying up, but for him, but he was such a likable guy. And he used to say, back then we were lucky enough that we used to have a little bit more access to players, pre-game. You used to be able to stand at the front of the Hammersmith end, with your program and a pen, and they'd come and sign it. And he'd always have time for fans to come in to sign things. So I used to have like loads of his signed photos and signed posters that he used to get in the middle of the program, stuff like that. That he was so nice, and he would always do it. And even after football, he's got over cancer a couple of times. And he has his charity, that he runs mainly with with Birmingham City. It's so great to see him being such an inspiration off the pitch, as much as I used to love him on the pitch. So he's a great entrant into the FFC&Me Cult Hero Hall of Fame. I'll happily put him in there. No problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you very much for giving me your time, mate. I really appreciate it. I know that it's close to 1 a.m. over there?
No, it's just after 2 o'clock in the morning now, right?
Oh, there you go. Just after 2 o'clock in the morning. There you go. So I appreciate you giving me all the time
thank you, mate.
Come on the show, mate. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ash.